Hello, welcome to another YouTube video. Today I will be doing a quick review of every book that I have read this year, and I will outline what I am planning on reading later this year on my to-be read. So let's begin. So far, the first book that I read this year was On the Incarnation. It's an amazing achievement of theology to give the purpose of Christ's mission on this earth and his divine importance, and this was written in less than 100 pages. On the Incarnation is a great piece of theology of Christianity, which contains not the origins, but a good explanation of the hypostatic union, theosis, the Trinity, the essence and energy distinction in simple yet powerful ways before they can be later synthesized by later theologians. And another book that was within I got On the Incarnation and Against the Heathen. Against the Heathen is also a great book to understand what the early church fathers were evangelizing and who they're fighting against, the arguments which they're using against pagans, but they can also be used against modern-day religions and even atheists. Here are some of my favorite quotes from both books. For often the artist is even when not seen is known by his works. He is by nature invisible, yet he may be seen and known by his works. That is in Against the Heathen, chapter 35. Another quote, why the cross of all this? On it he held out his hands to unite all, Jew and Gentile, in himself. That's On the Incarnation, chapter 25. So those are two of my some of my quotes that I like. And also I believe it's the last chapter of On the Incarnation. The most famous quote of this book is God became man so that man may be made like God. And the fact that he wrote all of these amazing books at 19 still blows my mind. The amount of depths in of history and of theology and philosophy at the age of 19 that St. Athanasius had to do to write these books is insane. And he's one of the greatest saints where he defended Christianity against Arianism. In the Council of Nicaea in 325, he outlined the Nicene Creed with all the other bishops that were there. So for those reasons, I give this book an 8 out of 10. The Metamorphosis and Other Stories. This book I read with great anticipation and was not so surprised by how great it was. The way that Kafka writes prose is very direct, and he still writes with stimulation for the reader. Sometimes it felt like a slog to get through, but that may be my own fault due to a lack of attention span. My rankings of the story within the volume which I read would be, my favorite would be The Judgment, my second favorite, The Metamorphosis, my third favorite, In the Penal Colony, my fourth favorite, A Report to an Academy, my fifth favorite, A Country Doctor. The overall themes of these stories would be as such. Dependency would breed animosity and resentment. I already have a video on Metamorphosis if you want to watch it. It's about the same, ideas, but just fleshed out to a greater degree. I'd rate these stories at an average of about a 7 out of 10. Dune, a simple masterclass of a book in my opinion. People often say that they didn't enjoy the prose, but I personally really liked and enjoyed Frank Herbert's writing style. And even though this is obvious in every detail, it feels meticulously crafted and has a particular purpose for everything within the book. An amazing book that feels timeless and will eventually become a classic for ages and ages and hundreds of years to come. I regret very deeply dropping this book after months of reading it, and I dropped it for about a month due to neglect and laziness. I don't know why I do it. I really liked the book, so I don't know why I stopped reading it for that time. Just I was lazy. I enjoy the themes of how authoritarian powers form, and I see a parallel between how Paul comes to power and how Plato describes tyrannies and tyrants to come about. Also, the the event of the Gom Jabbar was an interesting thing in my opinion, and to see how we may see differences between humans and animals. So for that reason, I rate this book to 10 out of 10. Dune Messiah, which is the second book of the Dune saga. It felt like a nothing burger in my opinion. A lot of the plot didn't amount to anything and it pales in comparison to the original Dune. It's kind of weird. There's a lot of weird scenes. The writing style also dropped a little bit. The political parts of it were interesting when they espoused their ideology. Most of it was already espoused in the original Dune. But I did like the political talks, like I just said. And also I like Duncan Idaho's plot within the book. So for that reason, I would give it a 6.5 out of 10. While I was reading Dune Messiah, I read a collection of essays by Penguin Classics called Dark Days by James Baldwin. It was a good collection of essays, which many maintained my attention. They have really interesting insights into race relations within America. My favorite quote from the book would be as such: In the lowercase, education refers to relations that actually obtain among human beings. In the uppercase, education refers to power. My rankings of the essays within this book would be Dark Days as an 8 out of 10, The Price of the Ticket a 7 out of 10, The White Man's Skill a 6 out of 10. The book I read after this would be The Death of Ivan Illich by Leo Tolstoy. It is an existential book filled with dread and the build-up to the death of Ivan Illich. The quick prose, which allowed me to finish it and had interesting political thought. The dread which built up to the death was interesting, but I didn't like how much, it just built up. It didn't really move me that much personally, like other people say it has for them. I personally liked How Much Land Does a Man Need? Penguin Classics edition of Leo Tolstoy better than The Death of Ivan Illich. My favorite quote from the book would be, "There's no explanation. Agony and death, what for?" In my opinion, this is an absurdist or existentialist, philosophical position, so that there's no meaning in death or in suffering within life, which I disagree with. But overall, I'd give this book about a 7 out of 10. The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. One of my favorite quotes from this book that stuck with me would be, "If a man treats his life artistically, his brain is in his heart." Another great quote from this book, well, not great, but quote that stayed with me and sees how many people live their life is, "The one thing worth striving for is youth. That's the one thing worth keeping." An amazing book, worth all of the praise that it is given, and I personally think it deserves much more. The amount of amazing aphorisms and philosophical thought, which Oscar Wilde puts generously throughout the book, is an amazing and perfect way to go about it. And it goes perfectly with the flow of the book and doesn't feel forced in any such way. Lord Henry's monologues were intriguing to read and to tackle responses to due to the immorality of them. The amount of notations that I have in this book are unmatched for any other fiction or classics that I've read at this point. And both the plot and the themes of the book were amazing. Please, if you're going to read one book from this video, I personally think you should read this book. And for that reason, I give it a 9 out of 10. The Dialogues of Plato is my favorite. This is one of my favorite quotes from the book. "Then are you not unashamed not to take every care and thought for understanding, for truth, and for the soul, so that it may be perfect?" This quote encapsulates both my feelings for the book and for the book itself. This was an amazing book to read, and it has timeless wisdom for all ages. Well, not for all ages, but for the age that we're in. And it served as the basis of all of Western philosophy. From Plato's proofs of the universals, to the theory on the development of governmental systems, to the tyranny of the mob, and many such other amazing ideas, this book is amazing. The volume that I read contained Ion, Meno, the Symposium, the Republic, the Apology, Credo, and Phaedo. And from the Symposium, there's a dialogue between first Socrates and the rest of the Symposium. And while he's giving that dialogue, he's also recounting a story that he had of Diomede. And this was a quote: "Because what grows old and leaves behind something new like its past self, by this device, Socrates, mortality partakes of immortality." This is a fitting description of someone's desires to have children, in that having children is in some way a part of you living on in someone else. The dialogue, the Apology, Credo, and Phaedo are all also amazing. The Apology has an amazing speech delivered by Socrates, in which he's defending himself against all of the people that were persecuting him for spreading his beliefs. Not even spreading his beliefs, making people think more critically within Athens and to question the sophists. In Credo, Socrates defends unjust laws by saying that we are held to respect the state which has put in these laws, so we must respect even laws that are unjust. For we have shown respect to the state our whole life. Why should we arbitrarily now disrespect it? In Phaedo, which his death occurs, he deals with mortality and sees death as a good thing, for it frees the soul from the body, which he sees as a good thing, due to his mind-body dualism. And finally, the scene in which Socrates' forced suicide happens is gut-wrenching and really sad. But I do not agree with everything that Plato says, and in most things I actually disagree with him. But all philosophers and any person who thinks must show respect to him for paving the way for all of us to have proper philosophy and philosophical thought. Some of my qualms with the dialogues is sometimes fallacious reasoning, logical jumps between certain points, and that the people, his interlocutors, weren't always giving developed points. They were just saying, obviously a straw man of what other people would actually believe without properly developing it. Sometimes the translation which I read isn't the most readable, but it's only like that for typically like a sentence or two. And one last complaint that I have specifically just with this volume, that Youth Pro does not make an appearance in it, which was, in my opinion, a misstep. Because I feel like Youth Pro is a much more important dialogue than Ion. But these would be my favorite quotes from the book. Beautiful things are hard. That was my first quote. My second quote, most of the labors and all of the hard ones are for young men. My third quote, those are wise whom they keep company with. My fourth quote, we must value not living but living well. And the last quote, which I will say, it is never right to do any injustice or to do injustice in return. Within the dialogues, I'd rate Ion a 6 out of 10, Menno a 7 out of 10, the Symposium a 9 out of 10, the Republic a 10 out of 10, the Apology a 10 out of 10, Credo a 9 out of 10, and Phaedo an 8 out of 10. Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. This is my most important quote from the book, because I got you and I got you, they were saying to each other. Such a sad book. The first half of the book, I struggled through, to be honest, because, I don't know, the wording was weird, the way they spoke was weird, the prose wasn't the most approachable. But the second half of the book kept me gripped throughout with all of its sadness and the abruptness of it all and how quick it went. The main theme of the book is akin to the Metamorphosis, with dependency breeding resentment, but in the opposite way compared to the Metamorphosis. For the Metamorphosis, Gregor, his family was originally dependent on him, and then eventually he became dependent on his family. But in this book, Lenny is dependent on George, and George doesn't realize he is also to some degree dependent on Lenny within the book. But then after the death of Lenny, which he had to do himself, he realizes he's not in any way dependent upon Lenny, and he goes to living his life, in which he continues to say, life would be easier without you, which happens. The final 15 pages of this book were heartbreaking, with the ending of George explaining to Lenny their dream of what they wanted to do and living with the rabbits and everything. But eventually he kills him, because that's what he had to do. He just wanted Lenny's mind to go somewhere else. And by proxy, in killing Lenny, he killed the dream which they shared. Right after he killed Lenny, he got up, right back on track with his new acquaintances, and lived a life which was without Lenny, but as he would say early in the book, was easier. Lenny said he wouldn't do nothing without George, but George could easily live without Lenny, and that is seen in the ending. A very sad book, but is critical for American literature. The prose is weird at first, but I got used to it. I give this book between a 7 or 8 out of 10. Now we'll be getting onto the segment of the video of books which I want to read this year, like later. So let's begin. So far, my current read right now is The City of God by St. Augustine. Look how big that book is. I'm on page 149 of 1,010 pages. Oh no, 1,100 pages actually. I started reading this book about 4 days ago, so I think I should be able to get it done in like 20 days. The book in which I want to read... Oh crap. The book I want to read afterwards would probably be Leviathan by Thomas Hobbes. Because now I'm doing like a political structure, like political foundation of the Western world. So right now I want to see like what the political foundations of like all of our governmental systems are. So right now, after The City of God, which is about like the separation of the city of God and the city of man, and the structures which go about due to that. And also just, I don't know, it's like deeper explorations of like the fall of Rome and things like that. Leviathan is about absolute government and why Thomas Hobbes believes that absolute government is the best form of government to maintain sovereignty and power over people. The quote from the back of the book, because I have the Oxford World Classics edition, is, "He that is to govern a whole nation must read in himself not this, or not that particular man, but of all mankind. He must not be able to rule just particular groups, but he must be able to rule all mankind." That seems interesting. And my ultimate goal of all of this is to read, I'm not a communist, but the Communist Manifesto and other political writings. This has a bunch of political writings from within the last 300 years, including the Communist Manifesto. It also has discourse on the origins and foundations of inequality by Rousseau. It has Policy by Voltaire. It has the Appendix to Common Sense by Thomas Paine. It has the Declaration of Independence. It has, Manifesto of it. Has from Mark. It has so many different political like leanings. It's not just leftist. It's also some right-leaning ideologies. It's ideologies in general. I just want to know about like the historical basis of where we are now. like Leon Trotsky, Mao, Che Guevara. All these figures, also Gandhi. All these figures are very revolutionary figures, and they're interesting to learn about. After that, I'm not sure. Well, I'm gonna read that. I might read that about the end of the year. But I also want to read On Happiness by Epicurus. Epicureanism is like a really, I believe, misunderstood philosophical like belief. People believe it's just plain hedonism, but like from what I've read about Epicurus so far, it doesn't seem that it's just pure hedonism, but it also seems like it has like self-control as an aspect of what he sees as happiness. So the book is only about 120 pages. I can finish that in like a day or two. So that's going to be a quick read. This is another book, Existentialism. That's not the book. But I love existentialism as a philosophical like belief. You like to ponder existence and the meaning of everything. That's like the most like basic like belief, like the common people, that they have a philosophy that's just, the meaning of life. Obviously it's more than that, but that's also what this is about. Fear and Trembling. So that's from Kierkegaard. Fear and Trembling is about the story of Abraham and Isaac, and about how Abraham, despite like his own moral leanings to not wanting to sacrifice his son, he still goes with God's plan to sacrifice his son, but God obviously stops him. That's not right to do. But I believe this and City of God are the two like main basis of divine command theory within philosophy from reality. And The Sickness Unto Death is about despair and about the absurd. So these are all really interesting topics to like read and discuss about and write about. So that's gonna be an interesting read. Another existentialist who's also sometimes mischaracterized as a nihilist, Friedrich Nietzsche, Beyond Good and Evil. This book also seems... So my camera keeps cutting out, but I'm just gonna say Beyond Good and Evil by Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche was a existentialist, atheist, like many of the people after him. But the first existentialist, I believe, was Soren Kierkegaard, who I'll be reading before him. So yeah, this is his critique of traditional ethics and morality. I'm probably not going to agree with him, but it's just interesting insight just to know things. So yeah, that would be an interesting read. And then Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. I've read one book from Dostoevsky so far, which has been Notes from Underground, which is an enjoyable read. I read it in October. So yeah, Crime and Punishment about a man named Raskolnikov. I don't know how to say his name, I'm not Russian. But he kills his landlady, and then he has to deal with the consequences both externally and internally about that and come to terms with it. So it seems like an interesting book. I love existential themes and every like thing. My favorite like show or movie is Evangelion, which is a heavily like existentialist anime. I just love existentialism. And then another book I want to read is Jane Austen's Sense and Sensibility. Many people say Jane Austen is a really good author, and everyone reads Pride and Prejudice, but I don't know. This seems more interesting. So I'm probably going to read this in like, I don't know, late summer. Hopefully it's an enjoyable read. Forgot to mention another book which I want to read, The Histories by Herodotus. If I find time for it in about November, I'm trying to read it. These are all the books which I have read, I want to read this year. And this is all the stuff that I've read so far this year. So you look at comparison of them. Obviously, the stuff I want to read is more than the stuff I have read. And I need to pick up the pace of reading. I know I've been kind of a laggard earlier this year in my reading. I haven't been reading that much. I'll probably meet my reading goal, which is about 15 to 20 books. So I'm going to pick up the pace in the upcoming years. I also forgot to mention, I want to read The Histories by Herodotus, which is the first work of history ever in Western civilization. Also, I believe in anywhere, yeah. So yeah, that'll be an interesting read. City of God, 1,000 pages. Leviathan, about 400. Communist Manifesto and Other Revolutionaries Writing, about 300. On Happiness, 100. Fear and Trembling and The Sickness Unto Death is about 500. Beyond Good and Evil, about, I believe, 200. Crime and Punishment, 500. Sensibilities, 200. And then Histories by Herodotus, about 800. So that's everything I want to read. Thank you for watching this video.